This video contains spoilers for the entirety of Dead Space. Was everyone excited about the Dead Space remake? I wasn't. I mean, I love Dead Space, but the announcement of a remake fell pretty flat to me. After the reaction to The Last of Us remake being that it sounded like a cash grab, Dead Space being remade didn't seem like a big deal to me. I mean, we had the Callisto Protocol to look forward to, and it was being made by people who worked on the original Dead Space. Surely that would be the game to look forward to. A big reason I wasn't excited about this for a long time is due to the disgusting treatment Visceral Games received under EA and other leadership positions. Pushed and pushed over the years to turn Dead Space into a $300 million selling action franchise instead of catering to the horror audience that made it successful to begin with. The big sequel, Dead Space 2 in 2011, was very well received, adding a lot more level variety, new weapons and enemies, and some much needed improvements to the controls. But it lost the isolation horror edge that the original had by going for a big blockbuster experience. It took a silent protagonist who, sure, he didn't need to stay silent, but they turned him into Uncharted's Nathan Drake, making quips and talking all the time, screaming profanities left and right, and by the time he's flying through space dodging buildings, he's gone from simple everyday engineer to essentially being Iron Man. Dead Space 2's main story, focused around Isaac's apparent guilt surrounding his girlfriend, feels incredibly forced, underdeveloped, and cheesy, failing in every aspect in which a smarter game like Silent Hill 2 succeeds. There's way too much teen Hollywood movie style of horror that comes across as boring, or even laughable once it goes on too long. And while Dead Space 2 is said to have fallen below sales expectations for EA, they probably could have saved millions by just cutting a lot of these unnecessary set pieces and cinematics that the original never needed. Despite all of that, I am still a Dead Space 2 fan, more so than I am a Dead Space 1 fan. I'll be doing a video specifically about that very soon, but I do love the original game. And I'm happy to say here that the Dead Space remake is fantastic. It delivers almost everything I could have wanted from it. That's largely due to the gameplay changes made by mixing Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2 together in very important ways. We'll talk briefly about the graphics. It is unquestionably a gorgeous game. It's not all about graphical fidelity, it's about art direction. And there are moments in Dead Space that are breathtaking. Just look at how the first zero gravity section has been changed to accentuate the heightened artistic look. The zero gravity sections in particular are stunning, taken to a higher level just by your ability to better appreciate them with the implementation of Dead Space 2's controls. The lighting effects and reflections are impressive, any area that had fog was a true visual banquet for my eyes, and I love the environmental effects on Isaac's suit. Chilled coming out of Zero G, frozen while in cryo, and dripping with blood after combat. If you get in close, you can see little inscriptions on his armor. There's just a very loving amount of detail here. The remake goes for a much darker experience than the original, and I do mean the lighting. It's a lot like the Resident Evil 2 remake in that way. RE2 was a very colorful game with lots of brightly lit areas, and the remake has you walking around in the dark for a lot of the time. I'm personally not a big fan of this change. I think it's fine to have, sure, it's a horror game, but I would have preferred to see more clarity in a lot of these spaces, like the original. Fortunately, as the game goes on, the pitch black darkness motif starts to slip away, as we enter areas covered in alien flesh, the nicely illuminated hydroponics area, and I just love any time the game goes completely red. What can I say about the monsters and gore? They're disgusting, they're horrific, incredibly detailed. The skin peeling system is amazing, seeing bits of flesh peeling away with every plasma cutter shot, even seeing entire bodies of skin get peeled away by the force gun. It's excessive and beautiful. The technical performance on PC leaves something to be desired though. I mean, it's not a disaster like Callisto Protocol, but I've had issues. I guess it's time I upgrade from my 2070 Super because I've had to run Dead Space at 1080p on medium settings to get a consistent 60 FPS. But even then, I had a lot of wild jumps in frame rate. Sometimes I'd be sitting at 120, drop to 75, up to 90, down to 60. So locking it at a max of 60 was the way to go. And I gotta say, playing this game on medium or even low settings, it does not look bad at all. Dead Space maintains its impressive look even on the lowest settings. Turning off NVIDIA DLSS and switching to TAA also helped in clearing up the visuals. It's disappointing to see no aim sensitivity options separate from camera sensitivity. I hope they can add that in. In the menu, we're missing an option I was hoping to see, moving the weapon wheel to the right so it doesn't obstruct my view of the reticle while I'm aiming, a problem that has existed since the original and continues to annoy me. The last thing I'll say about PC performance is that there is stuttering whenever the game is loading something in. It's the result of having no loading screens, but it happens a lot. Enough to be distracting. Maybe upgrading my graphics card will help out, but I've heard from other people having this same issue that have a better rig than me. And this isn't a PC issue, but there's some frustrating collision going on with objects obstructing your fire path. This happens in third-person shooters sometimes, when even though your reticle clearly shows you're aiming at something, you can't hit it because the bullets make contact with a door or a box. Some games have been able to remedy this, because there's nothing fun about thinking you're going to shoot something only to see nothing happen. Now let's move on to the gameplay. One of the best changes to the Dead Space remake is the connectivity of the Ishimura. Gone are the days of getting on the tram every time you complete a chapter. Now the chapters flow into each other seamlessly, Dead Space 2 style, and the tram serves as a way to get from one place to another, but it doesn't always have to be used. Different parts of the ship are connected through access hallways instead of being entirely separated by tram stations. It's more believable and makes exploring the ship more interesting. The map has been changed from the confusing, awful 3D map of the original into a flat 2D map, easy to read and separated by floors for easy comprehension. It's still not a game where you need to actually look at the map and explore to figure out where you're going and what you're doing, because there's still the waypoint system. The optional exploration of the original game has been preserved and expanded upon. There's always a room or a path to check out while you're on your mission. They aren't different ways to get to your objective, they're just optional areas with resources, story bits, and sometimes combat. Now we have doors and lockers that are security locked, requiring different levels of access, and they're a nice way to provide something new each time you pass through a section of the Ishimura. The game can be regularly introducing additional resources to you on repeat visits in a natural way instead of having to spawn in new stuff. Once you get clearance, you can wait till you're sent back to these spaces as part of the main mission, or you could go back yourself and open it up now. Going back to find these optional rooms and lockers actually had me looking at the map from time to time, which is an experience I definitely appreciate finally having in a Dead Space game. This system has replaced the power node system, which is not a change I'm crazy about. The original games had these rooms that required a single power node to open, which meant you had to make a decision as to whether you were going to use all your nodes on upgrades or hang on to one in case there's a node room coming up. It was something unique about the level-to-level flow of the original, and I miss it. I think they could have had both, security doors and like 3 or 4 power node rooms. I do like how some of the security doors are not on natural backtracking paths, so you'll have to go out of your way to access them. And some doors and lockers are locked behind a high clearance level that can only be obtained by completing a long-running side quest. Side quests. Something I never knew I wanted in a Dead Space game. And now that we have them, they suck. They don't really add much to the experience, all besides a few interesting story bits. You're just running around the ship, looking for audio notes or holograms, and then moving on to the next one. There's nothing to actually do, and the story bits you do come across are for the most part underwhelming. The real crime is that there's next to no action in these missions. I was expecting some side mission specific big fights, but they just never happened. And let's be serious here, Dead Space is not at its strongest when you're running around for 20 minutes not shooting things. You do come across some enemies though, because the game's new intensity director creates unique situations when you pass through previous areas. Enemies may pop out of a vent or be waiting to ambush you in some way, and they aren't scripted, they're different every time. They may not appear in the same place twice. It's a lovely amount of randomness to surprise you during exploration and on replays. As you're moving around, if you're a veteran of the original game, you'll notice the movement feels much better this time around. Your character feels more responsive, aiming is tighter, melee and stomp are faster, you can even stomp on multiple boxes easily. Grabbing items from lockers doesn't feel so inconsistent. Things have generally been sped up, though not to the degree of Dead Space 2. You can actually reload your gun while walking or running, can you believe it? Little annoyances like that have been fixed. You can activate a door while in a reloading animation, or while holding a kinesis object. You don't have to put it down, open the door, and pick it back up. All these little user-friendly changes make for a much smoother and less frustrating control experience, which is why I'm puzzled by the lack of input buffering on weapon switching. That's a pet peeve of mine. While I'm reloading a gun, if I press the button for another gun, that gun should start coming out when the reloading is finished. It's tedious to have to wait for the animation to finish before I'm allowed to hit the button. It leads to some moments of combat feeling unresponsive because you hit the button for the weapon but it didn't come out. It's weird that they would smooth out so many other things but take this out. Cause yeah, this isn't just the Doom player and me talking. This input buffering while reloading was in the original game. There's no reason for it not to be in the remake. It only hurts the combat. And it's doubly odd considering there's an absurd amount of input buffering on the fire button, leading you to shoot more plasma cutter rounds than you actually intended. But the combat doesn't feel bad, the combat actually feels great. The controls really contribute to that, but it's also the changes to the arsenal. Again, the improvements of Dead Space 2 are seen in this game with a larger inventory to hold all your weapons. There's more appropriate and powerful secondary fire modes, and the incredible addition of the Kinesis Impalement ability, using metal rods found in combat spaces, blades ripped from necromorph corpses, or cut from them during combat. The remake also adds fan blades from the vents where enemies pop out from. You can break these yourself to use this powerful projectile. And of course we can toss explosive barrels, and we have the Dead Space 2 stasis canisters to have fun with. With all these new combat abilities introduced into the Dead Space 1 experience, there's the risk of throwing things off balance if you don't tune the AI and the resources right. And that's a discussion we had in my video on combat balance. Please check that out if you're interested. It goes into my issues with this game's opening chapters in terms of resource abundance and how the combat doesn't entirely feel balanced for Kinesis abilities. For now, I'll just say that I think on the hard difficulty, the game does a pretty good job of eventually getting you into fun and interesting playstyles, with some concerns over the early game introduction of the easy-to-use and boring Ripper, and the lack of a higher difficulty like Dead Space 2's Zealot that reduces your resources. Anyway, the alt-fire modes have been rebalanced or reimagined. It's wonderful to see how useful the flamethrower alt-fire is, laying down a wall of fire to keep enemies away from you. The Force Gun's alt-fire is now a gravity well, and my favorite weapon, the line gun, has seen a huge change to its alt-fire, now setting down a laser trap to set up defensive barriers. Oh, or offensive death beams when attached to Kinesis objects. The first few times I tried to use this thing, I was trying to use it like the original mine alt-fire, and it shot a trap right into an enemy's chest, and he started running around shooting a laser at everything around him, even me. It was hilarious. Combat overall, despite some issues, feels fluid and fun. Encounters continue to escalate, new dangerous enemy types are introduced, all weapons have a strong role to play, and your Kinesis abilities really add that extra variety that made Dead Space 2 so fun to play, though there is too much auto-targeting on it. It's a great combat loop that'll get you into experimenting, and hopefully mastery as you try an all-plasma cutter run, or go for the permadeath impossible challenge. Upgrade paths have taken out the empty spaces, and it feels great to know that every node you spend is doing something. Dumping 3 nodes into a gun just to reach that small capacity upgrade was always so painful. Being able to immediately spec into a few of a new weapon's upgrades with just a few nodes makes it easier to pick one up and experiment with it. And like Dead Space 2, we can respec upgrades and use nodes on something else. The remake introduces weapon attachments that can be purchased or found that unlock extra branches for upgrades, with special characteristics at the end like greatly increased ammo capacity, extra damage on your secondary fire, all kinds of cool stuff to work towards as a reward for weapon loyalty. And each attachment comes with a free power node, so if you're between buying a node or an attachment, just buy the attachment because it comes with a node. That's a really smart way to get people to buy these things and not just leave them there. The stasis and kinesis upgrade trees have also been consolidated into the suit upgrades, so you'll be gradually upgrading HP, air, stasis energy, stasis duration, and kinetic damage all together instead of separately. It's efficient and helps unburden the player with so many upgrade options. The remake brings in the loot mechanic from Dead Space 2, where instead of items automatically dropping when an enemy dies, like the original, now you have to make additional contact. The game introduces this by telling you to stomp on an enemy you just killed, but you soon figure out that shooting a corpse will cause an item to drop, and so will using kinesis to throw an object, or throw the corpse of the enemy you just killed. Just like Dead Space 2, this creates a really fun loop of constant activity to mix into combat and exploration. If you've played the originals recently, you'll probably notice a real lack of impact in the plasma cutter and the line gun. I felt it immediately, the first time I fired. It doesn't have the boom. It feels wimpy compared to the original, and these kinds of details are important to me. It didn't feel amazing to dismember enemies like it does in Dead Space 1 and 2. Part of it is the wimpy sound effect, but it's also in how enemies react to it. I don't see limbs flying off like I used to. A lot of times they just fall down. And it used to stun them, now they just keep coming. Now, this is likely a change made to balance the difficulty to allow for the power of other weapons. If you can't just stun enemies with the plasma cutter and pulse rifle, there's more reason to throw down flame walls, push back with the force gun, explode with the pulse rifle grenade, send someone flying away with a kinesis attack, use stasis. It's a change that helps the variety of combat, at the expense of the satisfying feel the plasma cutter used to have. It's one of those positive and negative changes I mentioned in my combat video. Some other big sound changes have happened too, and they're from the Exploder and the Wall Guardian. Let me play a sound for you. If you're an old Dead Space player, that probably sent you into full alert. That's the sound of the Exploder. They signaled their approach with this loud shriek, and I miss it. They're a much more common enemy than the Dead Space 2 exploding baby, so it makes sense for them to alert you to their presence, for gameplay purposes. And honestly, I just really like that sound. Now they're kinda quiet, and I think it takes away from how memorable they are. And man, I hate the change to the Wall Guardian death sound. Just listen to him. Now listen to how he used to be. That is a scream that can shake you to your bones. It's absolutely horrific. It's a shame they took it out. As for enemy behaviors, they're all acting as they should. Some of them are more vicious than before. I struggled a lot more against lurkers than I remember having done in the past. That may be because I feel like there's some hit detection issues if their tentacles are between the reticle of your plasma cutter. Just look at how some shots seem to go right through him. The little pods that come out of the Wall Guardians also feel particularly more deadly. Phantom versions of enemies with high HP are definitely a welcome addition for New Game Plus, though I don't appreciate them saying that there will be new enemies. That's a lie and led to some disappointment. The swarmers that pop out of the pregnant stomach are a great reason to always have the flamethrower or force gun ready. Everyone is here. The only big change comes from the Brute, who isn't going to be popular with everyone. He used to be vulnerable in the back and in his armpits. You shot him for a while in the arms and then he curled up and you could go around the back. Stasis was a great tool against him too. Try to cut off one of those arms. Now he's armored in the front, so the game really wants you to stasis him and run around the back, where he's weak in different points. You can cut off his legs or arms from the back. He's a teaching tool, if not a fairly one-dimensional one. You can also get far from him and catch his new projectile attack to throw back at him, and it does a lot of damage. But being long range from a Brute isn't a likely scenario for a new player, so it's kind of an impractical option. You'd have to go behind him, cut off his leg, and then run away and catch the projectiles. And at that point, what are you doing? A lot of people are gonna miss the armpit shots, I know I do, but I see where they're coming from and trying to get new players to really understand the benefit to using stasis. It does lead to something quite cool in the introduction of the contact beam. The first time you fight this guy, it's exhausting, it's a pain in the ass, and you just wish you had a faster way to take him down. Then you get the contact beam, and in this same chapter you come across another brute, in a room with a wall-mounted stasis charge. So you freeze him, run around the back, and blast his legs with your new powerful gun. It works excellently. So they've actually used an enemy that was made to be less fun to fight as a way to show off the power of a new weapon. It's interesting. Dead Space has always been good at teaching the player through gameplay, whether it's seeing a broom fall on assist to show you they explode, or how the introduction to stasis has you in a room with an enemy that mauls you if you don't freeze him. The remake increases the number of explosive canisters in the first large combat space to get new players into using them, and in that same room we see an enemy with no legs crawling at you, reminding players to target their legs. The new Parasite cutscene shows Isaac using a fire extinguisher as a weapon, and then in the same room there's another fire extinguisher to try it out yourself if it made you curious and you hadn't tried it yet. So smart, I love it. And how about those enemy introductions? Showing the player what they do creates some of the series' best moments. Seeing a lurker shoot someone in another room before you face them, the exploding baby in the nursery crawling towards his mother. The remake has a great intro for the Leaper as you see him crawling through the vents above you before you meet him. And of course, there's the Parasite. The original's Parasite introduction was one of the best moments in the game, so good that they replicated it in Dead Space 2. Seeing this thing latch onto a corpse to reanimate it, and the new monster breaking through the glass to come after you, you get caught up in trying to deal with him as the Parasite scours the morgue looking for more corpses to transform. It's an iconic moment. The remake actually makes this a cinematic, which is both cool and not. It's great to just see this happening in gameplay, unable to take your eyes away, wondering what the hell is happening. It's sad to lose that in favor of a cinematic, but what a cinematic. We get to see an incredibly intense transformation of a corpse into a living necromorph, right in our face. It is insane. I don't even know if I can show this without getting demonetized. I'm sad to see the original moment go, but if this is the exchange, I'll take it. We also get a fantastic introduction to our main villain, Dr. Mercer, as he comes into the room freezing us with stasis, monologuing as he paces around, doing his best impression of Doogie Howser from Matrix 4. Hey, remember Matrix 4? Yeah, I don't either. But now that we're on to cinematics, let's get into one of my biggest gripes with this game, the story sections. No, not the story itself, we aren't there yet. I'm talking about the constant stopping and talking and waiting every goddamn 15 minutes. The original Dead Space had this too, the long unskippable intro, the sections of just waiting for people to stop talking so you can move on. It's not good there either. But look, it's been 15 years. Many games have the ability to skip story sections. And I'm not saying we should be able to skip it the first time. The pacing of Dead Space lends itself well to story moments. I enjoy taking it in. But these are games that people love to replay. There's a permadeath impossible mode, there's a new game plus. So why the hell is there no option to skip the majority of story moments? Trust me, there is nothing fun about the 5th time standing in this room doing nothing while I'm waiting for this arbitrarily locked door to open, just because Hammond or Daniels needs to tell me something. These sections are made much worse by the fact that they are now longer and seemingly more prevalent, because Isaac isn't silent anymore. Him talking means that conversations are twice as long as they used to be. I just want to open this door so I can hit the switch. Stop talking!
He's on the processing subdeck. I've got rig activity.
Oh my god! After finishing the game, there should be a menu option to skip story sections. And whenever possible, you can just hold a button for a second, it'll fade out and fade back in, and you're back in the game. Seriously, this shit is making it hard to replay the game and get better for an impossible playthrough. Just the idea of having to sit through the entire intro sequence every time I die? No thank you. How do you make a game with a permadeath mode with unskippable story sequences? Okay, now that we're on to story, what do I think of it? Well, I like the extra background info. There's a lot to read if you want to, and I think the best change comes in the addition of holograms that show different crew members as they're dealing with the events that led up to the disaster. We get to know our characters, and we actually get to know Nicole as we see her work and talk about what they're going through. We actually get to understand the problems Isaac and Nicole had, and why Isaac feels so guilty. I enjoyed all these new story additions. What I did not enjoy was the change to the twist at the end. In the original, Isaac discovers that the Nicole that's been leading him all this time was not actually her, but a hallucination caused by the marker. He was doing what the marker wanted the whole time, and Nicole actually committed suicide on the Ishimura. It was a fine direction for the story to go, nothing groundbreaking, but it works. It makes sense, and it's set up by Daniel saying she's been seeing her dead brother. The remake changes this twist in a significant way. There's a character named Elizabeth Cross that works in hydroponics, and she's looking for her husband Jacob. You talk directly to Elizabeth over video, but only see holograms of Jacob. At the end of the game, it's revealed that Nicole hasn't just been a hallucination, but it was actually Elizabeth the whole time. That the marker made her see you as Jacob, and you see her as Nicole. Sure, they kinda set it up by having Hammond see Chen as normal when really he was a monster, something they kinda fumbled and it doesn't really have the effect it should. But he's seeing things the way they really aren't, like you are. But while I think this change could certainly work, it doesn't, because it doesn't make any sense. When Daniels flies away with the marker, you meet Nicole in the control room where she tells you to bring her back. You do that, and then you head to the ship to leave the Ishimura. Nicole is not with you. She does not follow you. You don't see her leave the control room. You run all the way to the ship without her, and suddenly she's on the ship with you. This only makes sense if she's a hallucination, which she was in the original game. They changed it to her being a physical person, Elizabeth, that you are seeing as Nicole, but they didn't change what happens here, so it doesn't make any sense. And they easily could have fixed it. You could have seen Nicole opening the door through the ship window and running towards you. Easy fix, but they didn't do that, so the story is broken. In New Game Plus, you can actually find a security recording that lets you hear the conversation between Isaac and Nicole when they first come in contact. But at this moment, Isaac sees Cross as Nicole. Cross sees Isaac as his normal self, and she's confused by the way he's talking to her. That's an interesting detail to this new twist, but it makes me think about how much better it could have been. I think it would have been way cooler to be on the opposite side of this. Imagine if, when you first meet Elizabeth Cross, she's talking to you in this really weird way. She says things that are confusing to you, impossible to understand beyond the direct missions she's giving you, and it's because she's seeing you as Jacob. Then, when it's revealed at the end that you are seeing each other as Nicole and Jacob, suddenly you realize all the stuff she was saying to you now has a different context, and it would make you want to go back and listen to what she was saying, because it would now make sense knowing that she thought you were Jacob. That would have given us an interesting puzzle aspect to the story. It's a shame it didn't go that way, because without that layer, the new twist just doesn't evoke any feelings other than, oh. The final level, like the original, is still kinda slow and uninteresting, slowly moving the marker while enemies rush you. Sure, the combat is still fun, but at this point the game needs something more. A more interesting task, because you already did this task in the previous chapter. Actually, most Dead Space tasks are kinda lame. Find the circuit board, hit the switch, reroute the power, replace the battery. They're only tolerable after 10 hours because the combat is so strong. I do enjoy the change to the Weezers on a story level, injecting them with enzymes instead of shooting them, and I like the little shooty bubbles to break up the tentacles, but these are still just a bunch of go here and do this activities. Because Dead Space doesn't have puzzles, it has tasks. If it ever does attempt some kind of puzzle, it's usually so basic that it's debatable it could even be called a puzzle. Like the antenna array section of Dead Space 1. You gotta fix the signal by replacing the broken antennas. Well, you just put them in a circle and it's done. That's as much of a puzzle as the colored switch puzzle in Alien Isolation, where the solution is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But you know what? EA Motive, I gotta hand it to you. This new version of the antenna room is pretty damn good. It's about as good as a classic Resident Evil puzzle. You gotta actually look around, see what direction these things go in, look at the panel at the front, and align them with paths on the ceiling. Bravo, guys, bravo. You've put an actual puzzle in Dead Space. I salute you. Make 5 or 6 more, and I may actually consider calling you a survival horror game if I'm really drunk one night and feeling flirtatious. I also want to commend them for the puzzle-like room with the nuclear bomb. It's unstable, so any explosion will cause a detonation, and they put exploders in here. You gotta find kinesis objects around the room to kill them. A combat puzzle, how quaint. I'll wrap this video up with a few side observations. The final boss is better, but, you know, it's still the Dead Space 1 final boss, not that great. But it's better.
I mean, that's a valid point, but
okay, so
I wouldn't say it was good.
It's better.
Maybe it's better,
Okay,
but not good.
better.
I missed the old kinesis introduction. You found a lady with her eyes cut out, talking to you like she knew you were coming, saying she was waiting to give you this device. That was badass. Now the lady is just normal and dead in the same spot, and you pick up the kinesis module somewhere else. Lame. It's nice to see the part where the electric floor kills the lurker, but they missed the most important part, which is to leave room for the other guy to slowly inch his way along the wall in hilarious fashion. The music in the game is really good. It's mostly a total ripoff of Alien and Aliens, to the point where I'm amazed they haven't been sued, but hey, it definitely sets the mood. The best surprise moment was the ambush during the shooting range. Getting you into a challenge where you're actually running through a course hitting targets means the last thing you're expecting is a surprise attack, and it's one of the coolest fights in the game. It's good to see the old 2008 Dead Space wonky-ass physics make a return. Please never change. And I like that your switch hitting tasks involve changing power routes to access different areas. Choosing between shutting off the lights or shutting off the oxygen creates some pretty unique moments, and interacting with the world this way is very engineer. The asteroid section, which was a terrible, terrible part of the original game, has actually been reimagined into something far more engaging, less frustrating, and more importantly, short. I actually like this section now, but the extra Leviathan fight is a dud. Just not a very fun way to engage with this thing. I don't like the change to Isaac's face. I wanted them to go back to the original look, where he looked like a tired old man, and I think Gunnar Wright makes him sound too young. Daniels I think is alright. I prefer the outfit of the original Daniels, but the new face works for me, and her acting I think better sells the lie that she's innocent in all this. Hammond, I definitely prefer the old Hammond, way more memorable look and voice acting. While Hammond is less interesting than his original, the only character change I have a real issue with is Nicole. I know a lot of fuss was made about her face, and I don't know, it doesn't really bother me. She's supposed to be 39, in the original she looks too young for 39, and in the remake she looks closer to late 40s. I don't care too much about that. What bothers me is how boring she is. The marker is using your connection to her to manipulate you, and in the original she felt like someone real, like your girlfriend that is happy to see you, like how Isaac's image of her would be.
Isaac? Is that really you? It feels like it's been so long. But I can help you now. Come with me. Isaac? Is that really you? I never thought we'd be together again.
But the remake makes her very cold, a very dry manner of speaking. It ruins the moments when you see her, and it doesn't help your motivation much.
Oh my god, I can't believe you're here.
I thought I'd never see you again.
The beacon, right. They locked it in the workshop, but my clearance can get us in this way. You made it. You cleared the way. I can always count on you. There's still hope. You can recall the shuttle and remote pilot it from here.
I don't like her, and if you don't like Nicole, then an important part of the story is damaged. Alright, we're done. Dead Space is great. It's a fabulous introduction to the series. It's impressive as hell as a remake. It gets the majority of things very, very right. And I recommend it to anyone who can stomach some grotesque violence and scary monsters. It is probably the best video game remake since Resident Evil on the GameCube. They're very similar in that they play the same and have the same presentation, but they add new bits of story, they remix old locations by adding new spaces, they add new mechanics. RE Remake was a remake done right, and Dead Space earns that title too. Thanks for watching. I've got another Dead Space video on the way, so stay tuned. And if you know of a PC mod that skips the story parts and video calls, let me know.